leading an effective board. It looks so easy when you observe very experienced chairs in action. Sometimes you wonder, what are they doing? Because it looks so easy. But anyone who tries to actually chair a board, chair a listed organization, a large private organization, or a private equity-backed organization, knows how difficult it actually is. So I'm really thrilled to speak with someone who is very successful at it. So I'm delighted to talk with Andreas Utermann. Andreas was appointed chair of the board of directors of Vontobel Holding AG in 2022. Andreas led Allianz Global Investors, a global investment company owned by Allianz, for 8 years from 2012, initially as a co-head and global chief investment officer, and then as CEO from 2016. Welcome to the Better Boards podcast series. I'm Dr. Sabine Demkowski, founder and managing partner of Better Boards. We make the boards of the most ambitious organizations more effective. Our mission at Better Boards is to contribute to creating better boards. We do this by providing clients with an evidence-based approach for board evaluations and board development programs. Our clients have access to an innovative digital platform they can use for their internal or as part of their external evaluation. To fulfill our mission, we give a voice to all who care about creating better boards. Andreas, thank you so much for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
It's a pleasure.
Andreas, you had a very successful executive career and you were appointed to chair Vontobel's board of directors in 2022. I know that quite some chairs find it really difficult to make this transition between a CEO and a chair. What helped you personally to make this transition so successfully?
Well, I think the jury's out on that, right? I've only been in the job for a year and a half, and let's look at it in 10 years' time. Joking aside, I think the transition is greatly helped if you feel you've done what you need to do and what you thought you wanted to do as an executive. In my case, I started my career in 1984, and when I reached the point where I needed to take a break and then think about what I was going to do next, I'd been pretty much non-stop working for 36 years, which I felt was well enough. It felt sometimes a little bit like being in a hamster wheel, as I've shared with many of my former colleagues. And I felt that a role which was more strategic, more focused on engaging with stakeholders, be that shareholders or clients or the staff in a different way and in a much more coaching capacity, which would be something that would be hugely fulfilling. So it's a little bit about sort of giving back to the company that you work for in a different capacity, mirroring a little bit the transition I've made also in my personal life, which is to be engaged in much more pro bono activities. So that's kind of what really motivated me. And frankly, the first 18 months have been very fulfilling in that respect. I feel that people are welcoming my advice and welcoming me as being there as a sounding board and being able to contribute in that way.
Didn't you find it at times quite difficult not to get your hands dirty and jump in and really be a little bit more removed? And I know a lot of chairs who find this tremendously difficult.
I didn't find it particularly difficult, to be honest. Maybe that's to do with the fact that I kind of always enjoy the tasks that I do. It doesn't really matter what they do, and I focus entirely on them. I don't wish I did something else. Whether that's gardening, whether that's when I was a work student, I was driving parcels for DHL or whatever, I was always fully focused on that, not thinking, I'd rather do something else. That's just how I am and who I am. But I didn't really find that difficult. Now, of course, we'd have to ask my current colleagues. Maybe they feel that I'm more hands-on than I'd wish, but certainly that's not how I feel I'm behaving at the moment.
So, but another thing that you did quite differently. Early on, you initiated a board evaluation. And we experience that others are very cautious around this and try to push it back, do it as late as possible. What was your thinking behind doing an evaluation really early on in your tenure?
Well, I don't know. I think that's to do with the fact that I think getting transparent, honest feedback individually really is super helpful for personal development. It's also really helpful for group dynamics. So for me, not doing it and describing what you're telling me that's what happens in many boards, that they're kind of not doing these self-evaluations on a regular basis. I can't get my head around that. I would think that that's par for the course. It's something that you just need to do. And I didn't even think of that when I joined. I said, hey, let's do this. It sounds great. And I stumbled upon Better Boards pure coincidence. And I looked at it, as you know, 2 years ago, and we said that really looks like a promising way to understand the dynamics of the board better and use it as a tool to improve the dynamic within the board, but also use it as a tool to improve the interaction between the board and the executive team. So for me, that was natural. For me, it's not something you do once. For me, it's something that you do every year, just like a 360 appraisal system that you normally have at the executive level, and get as much feedback as possible so that you can really engage on a continuous improvement process, because that's what it's all about.
I mean, you really embrace it and you do not shy away from doing things that are a little bit outside the norm. For example, you just appointed at Vontobel a CEO duo. And many chairs we know always try to play it a bit safe in their industry. Yeah, because they think, oh, if we play it safe, it's okay. You're really quite courageous. Help us to understand your thinking and why it matters to really dare to go outside what's so conventional.
Well, I guess it's to do with potentially partly with my personality and partly with the fact that I was sort of trained as an investment professional. The one thing you know is that human nature leads you to, buy high and sell low, and that the only way to beat the markets is to beat human nature and therefore be contrarian. So if you want to be a successful investment professional, you need to be a contrarian. Sort of the way I was brought up was also by my parents that, really when everybody thinks in one direction, kind of groupthink, usually you're safe and best if you take the opposite view. So that's kind of my starting point. But that's, of course, not what led me to and led the board to choose a co-CEO structure, to replace Tenure Staub as CEO of Vontobel next year. It was really about the right moment in time with the right personalities involved. We felt that we had the strategy pretty much sorted. The two co-CEOs, the incoming co-CEOs, were behind that strategy. The board thinks that the strategy is the correct one, and therefore we are not proposing to change it. So that pushes you towards an internal solution naturally. We also face a challenge that we've decided a few years back to move from a more siloed approach to running our business to a more integrated approach, call it One Vontobel, and putting two senior people from the firm representing the majority of the business at the top of the firm sends a very powerful message to the team that collaboration is really what the next few years are going to be all about to bring One Vontobel to fruition for the benefit of all our clients. So that was really the thinking behind that. And the early days are very promising.
So what makes, in your view, a really effective chair?
Well, that's a tough question. I think partly it's circumstantial because different skill sets and different personalities will be required for different types of industries, different types of companies, and also different types of times in the cycle of a company's development. So I think specifically, it's very difficult to generalize. Now, I think there are some general tenets that probably attach to most good chairs. I think good chairs need to have a high EQ. Typically, if you have a good board, it'll be very diverse, with strong personalities on it, with sometimes diverging views. So the ability to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the board members who might argue a different case from the one that you as chair or the executive team wants is important to support the debate. I think the ability to create a safe space for people to speak up without fear of reprisal, retribution is really important. And so there's a bit of magic there as to how you do that. There's no real patent concept, but I think precisely what we talked about earlier, namely creating a safe feedback loop for the board members, such as we discussed with better boards, it is part and parcel of that to create that sort of culture of emotional safety around the board. And then also understand that some topics that the board will face are quite complex, and typically the board calendars work that time is limited. So I think you need to be prepared as a chair to invest time with your board members ahead of meetings to make sure that the meetings, the particular topics are well prepared to bring everybody along in constructive discussion at the board that will actually lead to results. Because the worst thing is you have a discussion that then needs to get postponed or is inconclusive to the next meeting. And therefore you need to, really invest the time. I think these are kind of some of the aspects I think a good chair will bring to the table.
No, our listeners love practical tips and insights. And in your answer, there are already a lot of great tips. But let's unpick it a little bit. How do you prepare for board meetings? What do you do?
Well, I take some time out. I actually ask my assistant to block time in the diary to think about the key topics might be that the board wants to address. Obviously, I need to liaise with the executive team to know what they need addressing in the board meetings. And that's quite important. Speaking of tips, these board meetings typically are long. So you need to spend time thinking through the agenda and the sequencing of the agenda. So what I've, for example, tried to do is really difficult topics that require quite a lot of intellectual input and emotional presence of all the board members and real attention. I try to block them in the morning of the board meetings because I know that attention wanes in the afternoon, and I'm thinking about getting external input from maybe external speakers. I planned that in the afternoon or late afternoon or maybe after lunch to get everybody's attention back. So the sequencing of board meetings are a significant part of a successful board meeting or not. I think being really, really clear about how long every topic will take on the board agenda is very important, because what you need to be able to do is to stick to the agenda pretty well. You know, you start often at 8:30 in the morning, then you have a break scheduled at 10 or 10:30, then you have another break at lunch, then you have another break in the afternoon. Feedback suggests, and my own personal experience suggests, that if the board meetings run over and the breaks are shortened or are, shifted in time, it makes the board members or some board members very antsy because, they have a life, they have other things to do, and they might have scheduled a call with their family or with a doctor in one of the breaks, and then the breaks don't happen. And then you get a dynamic in the board that's not very helpful because people get distracted or they want to leave the room or whatever. And therefore you need to be very, very firm about running the board agenda, but you can only do that if you thought hard about it ahead of time and making sure that you know exactly how long each topic needs so that you can actually give yourself the best possible chance to stick to the board agenda and the timings thereof.
I have to smile. I just completed the board evaluation where someone put the most important topics at the end because they thought that discussions can take longer. So they thought, it's better to put it at the end. So it's fantastic tips and tricks you shared here with us.
Well, I disagree with that. Send them my way. We'll have a conversation.
Yeah. What do you aim to do actually during board meetings? You alluded to some aspects already, but maybe you can spell it out again for our listeners.
Right. So I think the board time and the board meetings are very precious, right? Everybody flies in or travels in and, then they leave again. So it needs to be productive. So what I try to do is I try to keep admin stuff to the minimum. I've seen board meetings, even at the executive level, where the strategic topics get short shrift because the majority of the meeting is box ticking and kind of admin, what I call admin. No, don't get me wrong, admin is important, but you need to deal with it in an appropriate manner. So what I've instituted is there are topics on the board agendas that are pretty admin-y. It's approval of minutes and things like that. And while, of course, they need to be approved when every board member is present, what I've instituted is ahead of the board meetings, ahead of the physical board meetings, there is a call. We call it a BOD, Board of Directors prep call, which deals with administrative matters. We don't decide anything in those calls, but all the questions related to minutes or decisions that the board needs to take relating, extending a loan or something like that, they can be asked in those pre-meetings so that when we get to the board meeting, we spend the minimum amount of time making the actual decisions on those topics, and we can give more time to the proper strategic discussions at the board. So that's one,
fantastic,
I think, important measure to try to keep the admin stuff out of the way of the physical board meetings. The second thing I try to do, and I alluded to it earlier, is to make sure that the board meetings are not only to topic, but also varied. So it's not all about finance or it's not all about strategy. It's got to be a mix of things because, first of all, diversity in topics, is more engaging, and naturally, some board members will tend more towards one type of topic than the others. You want to make sure that everybody gets something out of it. So I typically try to have some sort of external input. I have some sort of internal input from the executive team, different types of topics. You could maybe sometimes a diversity and inclusion topic or a mental health topic or a strategy topic on a particular, invite an external speaker so that it's a mix of topics that can be discussed at the board. That's how I'm looking at it.
Full of tips here. Thank you so much. What are typical meetings, typical activities actually in between your board meetings? What do you do?
Well, myself, I'm pretty busy. My contract says I'm contracted to work 80% of the time as a chair. So typically I'm in the office most days when I'm not traveling. And when I'm in the office or traveling, typically I meet stakeholders. So this morning, for example, I had a 1-hour meeting with one of our largest shareholders who wanted an update on our business and the recent announcement, the co-head structure. I meet clients every week, a lot of clients. And of course, I meet regularly with internal constituencies. So that's kind of what my working day looks like. Obviously regulators are an important part of, and then of course, keeping in touch with my peers at other banks and other asset managers. All of that is part of my working day. For the other board members, the ordinary board members, if you will, that have mandates, they don't have offices at Vontobel, they just come in for the board meetings. But they do also support in various ways, either as sounding boards for particular subject matter expertise, or indeed also to support client development. And that's what many other firms do, and we do this very well. So the board members are engaged between board meetings sometimes doing that.
Great. I recall a video that I saw on LinkedIn where you were walking around the Vontobel offices and someone was interviewing you and you were sharing insights. Now, very few chairs.
I did one yesterday, so that'll be posted soon.
Yeah, fantastic. Very few chairs actually embrace social media like you do. And very few are so open. I have not seen another chair walking around offices and sharing insights. What motivates you to do that?
Well, first of all, all credit to our media team. That was definitely not my idea to do that. They came up with that, very creative. And look, I am naturally somebody who embraces change and novelty. That's just, I'm curious about stuff. And what I've always done in my career, I've always trusted the people who give me advice. The people who work for me and advise me, they're there for a reason. They're there to give me good advice. Now, if I, more often than not, don't listen to them and say, well, I think I should have other advisors, but I don't. So I trust the people who work with me. So our social media team said, hey, Andreas, this would really, really a good idea. And by the way, I think it's going to be much more engaging for the audience than what you've done previously and what other people do. Let's try it. And I said, sure, if that's your view, let's try it. And lo and behold, it had a lot of engagement, a lot of reposts and all of that. So we're thinking of doing that regularly, but that's just because I'm listening to my advisors.
Yeah, no, I can highly recommend it to our listeners. It's very insightful and it's very dynamic. Again, that it provides nice insight. It leaves a very positive feeling.
And I tell you what, it's also fun to shoot.
Yeah, no, what I also find surprising for a financial services institution, if I may say so, to be so open. A lot of them are very guarded. You're open, you're transparent. I also, when I shared it with some people, they said, wow. So congratulations on that one.
Well, there is a downside. I'm really sad that the world has become very cynical about many things. And even when you're transparent or telling the truth, it's almost like there is a sort of an assumption that you're not telling the truth. And it's sad. And I don't want to go down that route. I'm just going to continue on the advice of my colleagues to be as transparent and open as possible. And if sometimes that has undesirable results, so be it. The world, unfortunately, is in a challenged place at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Sadly, Andreas, I could talk with you for hours, but sadly, we have to come to an end. And at the end, I always ask, what are the 3 things our listeners should take away from this podcast?
I think be courageous. Don't worry about failing. I think that's the first point I'd make is, if you first fail, try again, right? So you have to learn. Look at life as a learning experience. And hence, coming back to the topic of this podcast, Better Boards provides precisely such an opportunity. It gives you an opportunity to learn what other people think and how to improve things. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is try always to be honest to yourself, to oneself, and make sure that you're not stuck in a rut, whatever you do. And if you think, you've run out of rope and you're no longer passionate about what you do and you're not learning anything anymore, again, be courageous and change. And the third thing I would say is take time to reflect during the day, several times during the day, to recalibrate your parasympathetic system, to make sure that you've taken in the day and the input you've received and figure out a way to put that to paper so that you don't forget. Because, as pressures during the day build and are incessant, it's very easy to have a great idea, but then to forget about it. And that happens to me sometimes. And you should have put that on paper. And what was it again? So take time to reflect just 2 or 3 minutes several times a day and jot down what comes to mind and then find a way to incorporate that into the next day or the next week or the next month, in the spirit of what I mentioned earlier, this continuous learning experience.
Andreas, thank you so much for your support and for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure talking with you. Great questions.
How can we help you and your board? We at Better Boards are always delighted to hear from you. If you have an idea for a podcast, if you would like to learn more about our work, if you would like to have a demo of our platform, get in touch. You can best reach us at info@better-boards.com. Thank you for listening.